I was 34, and the division I ran at Summit Edge Logistics felt less like a department and more like a little village I'd spent 5 years building brick by brick. Birthdays taped to cubicle walls, inside jokes and Slack threads, a tiny cactus on my desk, the one my team snuck in last Christmas with a bow and a note that said, "Water weekly, praise daily." It all fit into a cardboard box. Apparently so did half a decade of my life. The email landed before the sun had burned the fog off the Boise River. Subject line clinical, body colder still. Signed by my direct supervisor, Dan Weaver, the same man who told me to take the time I needed last week because my dad had died. The reason stated in terse corporate grammar: failure to maintain adequate presence during critical operational periods. I stared at those words so long they blurred, then snapped a photo with my phone and forwarded it to my personal inbox, a small act of witness for what I already understood. They were cutting me loose for attending my father's funeral. I didn't cry. I didn't march to Dan's door and demand a correction to reality. I shut down my computer, slid the framed team photo from the stand, our grinning faces at the retreat, mud still drying on our hiking boots, and started packing with a quiet, methodical calm that felt borrowed from someone older and steadier. My father's voice rose up from memory. The river moves, but the rocks stay. I wrapped the cactus in yesterday's newspaper like it was made of glass. By the time the early birds trickled in, half my desk was gone. Tanya from accounting rounded the corner, saw the box, and stopped as if the floor had tilted. "Holly, what's going on?" "I've been let go," I said, because calling it anything else would turn it into a story I couldn't carry. Apparently, bereavement leave doesn't demonstrate the right priorities. Her face shifted from confusion to fury. That's not how this works. Have you told Paula? She needs to hear." "I'm not fighting it," I said, tucking a thank you note from a mentee between wrapped headphones and a stapler. "But I'm not forgetting either." The news spread like a rumor in a small town. Jason appeared first, my sunshine on a deadline team lead, his usual grin gone. "This is garbage," he started, voice too loud for 8:20 a.m. "It's done," I told him, soft and final. "Dan made a choice, but we just closed Newbrook. Your plan is the reason margins are up 18% this quarter." He said it like evidence, as if facts could reverse a signature. Behind him, the rest of my core team gathered one by one, pulled by the strange gravity of sudden change. Ethan with hands balled like he needed somewhere safe to land his anger. Veronica already blinking away tears. Michael, Louise, Diane, Gabriella, and Kayla forming a quiet semicircle that felt like an embrace I didn't know how to accept without breaking. "You can't go," Veronica blurted. "The Wilson renewal's next week. Hernandez is mid-negotiation. No one knows the system like you." "Dan should have thought of that," I said, sealing the box with a firm scrape of tape. Saying my father's funeral out loud would make it too big for this hallway. I swallowed it back. "Everyone back to your desks." The order cut across the carpet like a blade. Dan stood there with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, trying on a frown that wanted to be authority. "We have deadlines now." No one moved. Not defiance, just the shocked stillness of people learning the rules were different than they'd believed. After a long beat, they scattered, but not before leaving me each a look I could read without words. "We see this. We'll remember." Dan stepped closer, dropping his volume as if kindness could be imitated by speaking quietly. "If you'd waited to pack until end of day, we could have handled this more discreetly." "Like the discretion you showed approving my bereavement leave and then firing me by email for taking it?" I met his eyes and held them. "Choose your next sentence carefully." For a heartbeat, doubt flickered. Then the mask slid back on. "Business needs change quickly. We need people who understand shifting priorities. HR is expecting you. Let's not make this harder than it has to be." "Don't worry," I said, lifting the box. "I'm not here for a scene, just remember this moment, Dan. It might matter later." Human resources lived in a white-walled, oxygen-thin space that smelled faintly of printer ink. Barbara Kent, A recent hire with a careful smile and kind eyes sat behind a desk that had a small plant and a large pile of forms. "Holly, I'm so sorry," she said, sliding separation papers across as if they were made of nettles. "And I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." The documents were exactly what you'd expect from a company that spoke fluent policy. 2 weeks severance, a non-disparagement clause polished with legalese, and a reminder that my non-compete said 6 months, 300 miles. I showed her the email on my phone. She read it, brows rising. "This is the notice?" "An email?" A quick glance back to the papers. "No performance plan, no written warnings, nothing," I said, "except grief." Barbara bit her lip, scribbled a note, then stood. "I need to check something with legal." "One moment." While she stepped out, I walked to the window and let the Boise skyline steady me. The river curled through the city like a ribbon of moving glass. My father had taught me patience there, waders pinched at the waist, the current tugging our knees. "Be the rock," he'd say, and laugh when I wanted to chase every ripple. Barbara returned with a face that said she'd tried and failed to push a boulder uphill. "Idaho's at will," she began, voice apologetic. "The company's within—" "I know," I said, signing where she pointed. "Summit Edge can choose. So can I." She hesitated, then lowered her voice until it nearly wasn't official. "Off the record. This isn't right. If you wanted to, I don't," I said gently. "But thank you for seeing it." The long walk back through the floor felt like a farewell tour I hadn't rehearsed. My team watched me pass with expressions that made my chest ache. I gave them a small smile, the last piece of leadership I could offer. "We're okay. Keep going." September air met me warm at the door. I placed the box in my trunk, sat behind the wheel, and let quiet settle like dust after a collapse. Then my phone started buzzing. "Jason, say the word. How do we push back?" "Veronica, are you okay? Coffee later?" "Ethan, he's a coward. Everyone's furious." The messages stacked into a chorus. Outrage, loyalty, the stubborn kind of love that doesn't require permission. I started the engine. A plan, small and clean, clicked into place. No lawsuits. No loud speeches. Strategy instead. Patience. The rock the current has to move around. The phone rang again. This time a name on the screen I hadn't expected to see today. Hank Fleming, CEO of Vertex Transport Systems. The industry's worst-kept secret was that Hank had been trying to hire me for months. I'd always smiled and said not yet. Inside the quiet of my car, with a cardboard box and a cactus as witnesses, not yet turned into its time. I drove across town to Vertex's offices, a space that looked like it had been designed by people who actually liked their jobs. Sun-drenched windows, open collaboration tables, maps pinned with strings and ideas. Hank met me with a handshake that said he meant what he said. "I heard something went sideways," he said, ushering me into a conference room with the Boise skyline poured across the glass. "I'm sorry it was this. Word travels fast in logistics." I told him the rest, slid my phone across the table with the email pulled up. He scanned it once, then shook his head. "That's not management. That's negligence dressed in a tie." "I thought loyalty insulated you," I said. "Turns out it's just warm until the wind changes." "I'll be straightforward," he said, leaning forward. "We're expanding in the Pacific Northwest. I want you to run it. Division director. Scope, authority, pay, all leveled up. And we'll handle whatever legal shrapnel they try to throw." My heart stuttered. Not from surprise, but from the abrupt relief of a door opening exactly when the hallway went dark. "There's a non-compete," I said, because saying the fear out loud makes it smaller. "Our counsel's already looked," he said. "It's broad to the point of brittle and context matters. Fired on bereavement? I like our odds." "I need the weekend," I said, because the rock doesn't jump just because the current invites it. "Monday?" "Monday," he agreed. "We'll talk specifics then." That night, I tucked into a corner booth at Riverfront Brewing with Veronica and Jason. Faces I could read like old maps. Worry, anger, protective affection. We kept our voices low, not because we were hiding, but because dignity deserves a quieter room. "How are you?" Veronica asked, eyes searching mine for cracks. Standing, I said. That's enough for today. Jason huffed a humorless laugh. The office is chaos. Henderson proposal buried somewhere no one can find. System access scattered because Dan thought titles equal knowledge transfer. That sounds like a Dan problem, I said, taking a sip of water. It wasn't pettiness, just accuracy. It's bigger, Veronica said, leaning in. People are shaken. If they do this to their top lead, what does that mean for the rest of us? Paula's asking questions she should have asked yesterday. My phone buzzed with fresh proof. Texts from Ethan, Louise, Diane, Gabriella, and Kayla. Stories of disorganization. Frustration rising in elevators and hallways. Anger turning into resolve. What now? Jason asked. Not a plea, a checkpoint. I have an offer, I said, watching their eyes widen and then sharpen. I'm thinking. Those non-competes don't always hold, Veronica said quickly, her contract brain already sorting case law from logic. Especially not after this. Vertex's lawyers agree, I said. Still, it's a decision, Jason's phone pinged. He glanced down and grimaced. Emergency meeting? Saturday morning. Dan's desperate. Wilson reviews Monday, and no one can find your analysis. I didn't say that the files were exactly where they were supposed to be on the server. Organized, documented, thorough. I also didn't say that understanding the analysis required context you couldn't download. Both facts could be true at once. I've got an early appointment, I said, sliding out of the booth. Sleep. We'll all think clearer. Saturday found me in a quiet office with a lawyer recommended by a friend, diplomas shining on the wall like proof of persistence. I laid out the email, the timeline, the contract. He lifted his glasses and whistled softly. Textbook wrongful termination, he said. But you said you don't want to sue. I want to move forward, I said. I want to know how much power that non-compete actually has. He read it like a mechanic listens to an engine. Overbroad. 6 months and 300 miles is functionally an eviction. In Idaho, courts are skeptical when employers act in bad faith. Given your circumstances, if they push, we push back. I walked out lighter. Not reckless, just informed. The messages from my team kept coming all weekend. The Saturday meeting had been tense. Dan had tried to paste my responsibilities across everyone without additional time, pay, or common sense. The Wilson files had been found, but understanding them was a different weather system. My absence wasn't a hole. It was a map missing legends. By Sunday night, the decision stopped trying to hide behind words like maybe and later. I set my alarm for early. Monday would arrive either way. I chose to meet it standing. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. New episodes every week. Comment below. If your boss fired you by email during bereavement leave, what would you do first? Lawyer up, walk away, or something else entirely? And if you're feeling this story so far, give it a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who need it. Monday dawned brighter than I felt, the Boise skyline painted in sharp autumn light. I dialed Hank Fleming before my coffee had cooled. I accept, I told him, and my own voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. But I want one condition. If my old team applies, they get fair consideration. Hank didn't hesitate. Done. If they're half as good as you, we'll fight to get them. Relief spread warm through me, not just for myself, but for the 7 faces I couldn't stop picturing. Jason, Veronica, Ethan, they deserved better than being pawns in Dan's game. Still, one shadow lingered, the non-compete clause. I wasn't naive enough to think Summit Edge would let me walk into their competitor's arms without trying to snarl the rope. That same day, I found myself in Vincent Torres's law office, mahogany shelves, degrees from universities that carried weight. He adjusted his glasses as I slid the contract and termination email across. They fired you for attending your father's funeral? His voice carried disbelief edged with anger. That's not just questionable. It's reckless. This non-compete? 6 months and 300 miles? Courts don't like overreach, especially when the employer's behavior stinks of bad faith. I'm not looking to sue, I said. I just don't want to walk into a trap. He leaned back, studying me. You're in a strong position. They'd have to prove actual harm, and firing their top performer undermines their own case. If they push, we'll push harder. Don't let fear stop you from living. By the weekend, I knew he was right, and the timing couldn't have been better, because Summit Edge was already unraveling. Texts poured in from my old team. Dan had called a rare Saturday emergency meeting, scrambling to plug holes with tape too thin to hold. The Wilson renewal was in jeopardy. The Hernandez contract was hanging by a thread. Files were found but unreadable without my framework. The office was frantic but not functional. My absence wasn't an inconvenience. It was an earthquake. Sunday night, I laid my phone on the table and stared at it until the decision no longer felt like a decision at all. It felt like inevitability. My father's words came back, steady as the river. Be the rock. Let the current do its frantic rushing. You'll still be here when it passes. I would not fight with noise. I would fight with results. By Tuesday morning, I sat in a coffee shop surrounded by the 7 people who'd once been my second family. Jason arrived first, then Veronica, then the rest until 2 tables had to be pushed together. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. Summit Edge is imploding, Ethan said flatly, his usual quiet voice hard. Dan's cracking under the pressure. Paula's breathing down his neck. Clients are calling nonstop. The Wilson account is threatening to leave, Veronica added. They asked directly why you weren't handling their renewal. I listened, letting the weight of their words settle. It wasn't pride I felt, but validation. Proof that the loyalty we built hadn't been one-sided. Finally, Jason leaned forward. We know you got an offer from Vertex. We want in. The others nodded, eyes fixed on me like this was a lifeboat and I held the oars. Gabriella slid confirmation emails onto the table. We already applied. All of us yesterday. I blinked, stunned. You didn't even wait to ask me? Kayla's voice was calm but certain. Where you go, we go. For a moment, my throat closed. These weren't just colleagues. They were my proof that leadership had mattered, that all the late nights and hard lessons had planted something real. I cleared my voice. Then I'll make the calls. What I didn't know then was how fast the ripple would reach Summit Edge's top floor. By Monday morning, Paula McCormick, the regional manager, was on my phone line. Her tone carried a polished calm that couldn't disguise the panic underneath. 7 resignations, all from your former team. Care to explain? I don't work for Summit Edge anymore, I said evenly. Career choices are personal. Maybe ask Dan why your best team is leaving at once. Her composure cracked. This is about your termination, isn't it? Holly, listen, Dan acted without my approval. If I'd been consulted, it never would have happened. That's between you and him, I replied. But you might want to consider why the regional manager was left out of the decision entirely. Silence, sharp as glass, filled the line. Then Paula exhaled. I'll be blunt. We want you back. 10% raise. A formal apology. It almost made me laugh. It's not about money. Then what will it take? Desperation had finally broken through. I didn't hesitate. Time travel. Back to the day my father died. Back to when basic human decency could have stopped all this. I let the silence linger until she had nothing left to say. Then I ended the call. I wasn't going back. Not ever. If you're following this story and feeling that shift, when betrayal turns into power, hit the like button so more people see it, and tell me in the comments, if your whole team wanted to follow you out, would you let them risk it? Don't forget to subscribe. Chapter 3 is where the revenge really lands. By Friday, the transformation was complete. All 7 of my former teammates had interviews at Vertex, and by the following week, every single one had signed on. We met for dinner at a quiet restaurant on the river, glasses raised in a toast that tasted sweeter than any victory speech, to new beginnings. Jason added, with a grin that reached his eyes for the first time since my firing, and to Holly, who showed us what real leadership looks like. Meanwhile, Summit Edge was crumbling from the inside. The Wilson account signed with Vertex within days, citing trust in the team they already knew. The Hernandez contract followed soon after. Clients didn't care about Summit Edge's hierarchy. They cared about relationships, results, and trust. and all three had walked out the door with me. Then came the call I hadn't expected. Barbara Kent from HR, her voice hushed but urgent. Dan's been placed on administrative leave. Paula's investigating management practices, especially around bereavement policies. The board's alarmed. Losing your entire team to Vertex triggered a full review. They're combing through every termination for the past year. I thanked her, meaning it. Not because it changed my trajectory, but because it meant the truth was catching up with them. Summit Edge had treated people like disposable parts. Now the machine was breaking down. Weeks turned into months, and at Vertex, we flourished. Our division grew by 30% in one quarter. We acquired 4 major clients, 3 pulled directly from Summit Edge's roster. Costs dropped, morale soared. The atmosphere was electric. People finally working not out of fear but from pride and recognition. My team, once shackled by micromanagement, now thrived in roles where their voices mattered. Jason led new initiatives. Veronica revolutionized client relations. Ethan, usually reserved, became the quiet engine of efficiency. They weren't just surviving, they were shining. Summit Edge, meanwhile, made headlines of the opposite kind. Restructuring amid client exodus, the business press reported. Contracts slipping away. Leadership in disarray. Paula called me once more, this time her voice heavy, stripped of polish. We'll match Vertex's offer. 15% more. Please, Holly. We need you. I told her the truth. What you need is a culture that values people. Money won't buy that back. Then I hung up, not with anger, but with closure. Months later, the final blow landed. Summit Edge was acquired by Meridian Shipping, sold for a fraction of its former value. The once proud company reduced to little more than an asset list. And Dan Weaver? Last I heard, still unemployed. Reputation in tatters, his name whispered in industry halls as a cautionary tale. Poetic justice, not because I'd destroyed him, but because he'd destroyed himself. On the anniversary of my termination, I received a small package. Inside was my cactus, rescued from my old desk by Barbara, now slightly taller, still stubbornly green. Her note read, Summit Edge closes for good next week. Thought you might want this back? I placed it on my new office windowsill at Vertex, sunlight pouring over it. Proof that sometimes what's discarded thrives even more when replanted. That evening, I drove to the Boise River where my father and I once fished. The current rushed past, fast and restless. The rock stayed, steady and unmovable. You were right, Dad, I whispered into the water. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It's building something better. Because my revenge hadn't been about lawsuits or shouting matches. It was this. Creating a workplace where people weren't punished for grieving, where their value was measured not only in profits, but in humanity. A place where leadership meant lifting others, not controlling them. Summit Edge collapsed because it never understood that truth. Vertex thrived because we lived it. And me? I had risen from discarded team lead to executive vice president, leading the Northwest region with the very people who had once stood at my desk in silent solidarity. We were steady rocks in a rushing river, and together, we'd carved out something unshakable. If this story struck a chord, give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more true revenge stories told just like this one, and drop a comment below. What do you think is the greatest revenge? Destroying what hurt you, or building something so good it makes the old system irrelevant?